Hello, everybody. Welcome to the June 27th occurrence of the Gateway API Gamma meeting. As a reminder, this meeting is covered by the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, so everybody please be nice and respectful to one another. As a reminder, we do have an open agenda, and I have linked that agenda to here in the chat. So please, if you've got a topic you'd like to discuss, feel free to add it onto the agenda. And also, if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and put your name and company affiliation or just general affiliation in the attendees list, just so we have a record of your attendance as we constantly try to evaluate our meeting times and make sure we're being inclusive to as many people as we can. That's all the housekeeping stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so everybody can see the agenda. Is that looking okay? Size, everything good to everybody? Fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. So first thing on our agenda, I think Rob or Shane is the best person probably address this as far as version 080 for Gateway API. What's missing from for Gamma, and what do we have in flight?
Yeah, I think this is really just a follow-up from the last meeting as well, but thankfully we have made some progress. Big thanks to Mike, not on this call, but he has a PR out for API spec updates. That is the one thing of all of this that we absolutely do need to get in before we can go to API review. The goal I had was to be code complete, ideally this week, but ASAP. I know we're about to run into some holidays, but we do really want to get this this through as quickly as possible. I think this is the big blocker. In my opinion, this is awfully close. I added some kind of nitpicky things, but I don't think there's huge blockers anywhere. But would appreciate some more reviews. Keith, I appreciate you taking a look, but others on the call, if you can take a look, this is really the first time that Gamma is being represented in API spec, and it's a little bit messy. I'll say that. You know, we're trying to combine two concepts and make them both make sense in the same spec. I think Mike did the best that we possibly could here, but it is a tricky thing. So yeah, help, advice, whatever wanted here. One thing I do want to call out, and maybe good for discussion here, I added a comment that I don't think has been discussed before, or I just missed the topic. There's one on reference grant. Yeah, that's the one. Thank you. Kind of two questions, but I'll start with maybe the easier one first. If a reference grant grants access from an HTTP route to a service, is that intended only for backend refs? I'm assuming so, but we haven't really clarified that anywhere, because now we're introducing another way where an HTTP route can reference a service, and we haven't really clarified what that means for reference grant. Anyone have a strong opinion? Like I mean, one potential interpretation of that is that if you use reference grant and you're using Gamma and parent ref for service, then what was a consumer route becomes a producer route. I mixed those up in my comment, but like you could like mix interpretations, but it feels really funny to do that. I don't think we actually want to do that. I don't know. Any thoughts?
Yeah, so from my perspective, reference grants purpose is sort of, I think it's fairly orthogonal to the parent ref interpretation of service, or the other parent ref usage of service, because especially in light of the consumer route piece of the gamification of the spec, essentially what you're saying is when I send connections to this endpoint, to this host, I should just say server, to the service, you send connection to the service, then this is the configuration, right? It's not a producer giving, or it's not something giving access to another service. It's more of saying, this is my destination, and to it, and make changes to the configuration or to the traffic in this way. It's probably the closest thing we have to something like egress. but that's irrelevant. But yeah, because of the outbound nature of it, I don't see where reference grant makes sense for parent ref from a ideological perspective. Not to mention the fact that the UX just gets really confusing if you can have reference grant for both parent and backend ref. Even on those merits alone, I wouldn't be in favor of it. But I think we have a strong enough a strong enough set of definitions that we don't have to. We can say no on more than just a UX basis. That's my perspective anyway.
I'm not hearing any strong opinions other than that, and I agree with everything you said. But please, anyone else, feel free to jump in. I think that is the most sensible. Oh, actually, John, maybe you're about to say something.
Yeah, I feel like I'm a bit lost in it. It's probably just been a long day, but what exactly are we saying reference grant is used for in Gamma? Because my understanding was it's actually not used. Is that aligned with what you guys are thinking, or am I lost?
Yeah, I think so. I
Okay,
think
okay. I just wanted to
there's-
clarify. Yeah.
right now we haven't said that anywhere in the spec, and I am suggesting that maybe we should. And I guess no, I should say that reference grant could still be useful in Gamma if we're forwarding to backends in another namespace. I don't know if we've. I don't know. That's something that is undefined right now, and I guess we need to define it. But at a minimum, we do not want reference grant to have any interaction with parent ref to service. That's the thing that I think we're all on board with.
Yeah, I definitely would agree with that. I will say in the original Gamma GEP, and we actually have a conformance test for this, we say that you don't need a reference grant for cross namespace with Gamma.
Cross namespace backend refs.
Yeah, backend refs. Yeah, I definitely agree. Never parent ref, never reference grant. That's I think clear. The law not using it for backend ref, that's maybe a bit more controversial, but it is specified in the GEP and conformance tested.
Okay, and we're saying that that's okay because mesh by and large has to conform to other other routing rules within the cluster. I mean,
the rationale was that in Ingress, you're saying like there's this thing that's exposing things publicly, and now some random person's exposing you. But in mesh, it's more like I can already call you, and now I'm just configuring how I call you. It's not really
so
inversion of visibility and whatnot.
How
that was the
is
argument
mesh
anyhow.
So I think the key thing would be, does mesh in general honor network policy? Or would it be blocked by network policy, or would it bypass a?
Most implementations of mesh cannot bypass network policy, kind of by definition. All the sidecar stuff, like there's no really way to bypass network policy. So yes, I don't know if I'll say that everyone, like I'm not sure the details of how Cilium, for example, does it, because they are both the network policy enforcer and the mesh. I'm pretty sure they respect network policy. I'd be shocked to learn they didn't, but I just don't know the details, so I don't want to make any sweeping claims.
So I think what we have in the spec already is that there's some such notion of you don't need reference grant for cross namespace background refs if you have some other form of security available. Network policy is an example of that, as long as network policy interacts, affects your routing behavior, and is not just going to be completely bypassed by something like a load balancer interpretation. Okay, so it sounds like we just need to clean up it sounds like we all agree. We just need to make sure that the spec is awfully clear around that. Okay, I can sketch it. I can update my comment or have a follow-up comment after this meeting, but yeah. I think that's the only thing I wanted to call out. Definitely appreciate anyone else taking another look at this PR, but I think it's fairly close.
Yeah, I agree. All right, the next one are doc updates. Flynn,
Yeah.
or actually Flynn's both of these. Bullet points. Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, Flynn mentioned in Slack today that he was unfortunately not going to be able to make it to today's meeting, but hope to get some docs updates out later this week. I would imagine that he would certainly welcome help if anyone is around and able to help. I can imagine that that would be very welcome here. So there are two things. One is the general docs updates thing is just adding larger and more information around Gamma instead of just right now everything's hidden in GEPs. And then secondarily, drafting a blog post that we can use to announce 080 and the official graduation of Gamma to something that is released in 080. Yeah, and so we have some rough idea for co-authors, but if you're not already looped in and are interested in being listed on that, definitely, I guess maybe reach out to Flynn. That's probably the best person. Yeah. Man, I think I have everything on this agenda. So anyone feel free to jump in. Oh, great. Thanks, David, for reaching out. Okay, so next up is just meeting time changes. I kind of went back through the agenda to try and see when people were showing up, and it's kind of a mixed bag. I thought the earlier time slot was getting more attendees, but it doesn't seem obvious either way. They've both been fairly lightly attended. What does seem increasingly, I don't want to say clear, but it seems like we may be moving to a point where we only need a meeting every couple of weeks instead of a meeting every week. So I'm at least suggesting that could be something to consider. I don't know if anyone has opinions on that. I'm just trying to make sure we're making efficient use of these times. So it sounds like John's on board with that. Anyone else? Cool.
I'll come off mute and just and say that I think biweekly makes sense. There's a lot of open questions in the beginning of Gamma and proving this out, and I think the frequency, the weekly frequency, was really helpful and aided in us kind of getting to where we are a year from now. I think because so much of, I think this is a good thing. I think a lot of the Gamma conversations are also happening in the Gateway API, the main meeting, the Ingress meeting, because it's cross-functional. There, at least for me, I'm seeing less mesh-specific things pop up. Usually, there's going to be something we need to go check with the main Gateway group about. So I think bi-weekly for now really makes sense. I will say that there is, I've had several conversations with folks, especially notably during KubeCon in Amsterdam, about mesh in Kubernetes in general, how Gamma is kind of a place where lots of mesh people have been looking to get things to happen, but Gateway API, like a Gateway API sub project, is not necessarily the best place for those same things to happen. And I think that to a point Rob made earlier, I think some of the attendance changes might be indicative of that. So I'll say, like, if there are things that you feel like if you have integrations with Kubernetes and service mesh that you feel aren't being met or nobody's looking at, reach out to me. I'd love to chat to see if there might be a way for us to do that. One area that comes to mind for me is telemetry and observability in general. So another good one is like CNI compatibility between service mesh and technologies and such. So if you've got thoughts on that, let me know, or let anybody know. But I'm interested in talking to more folks in Kubernetes and figuring out what the best place for some of those conversations would be, because I don't want to don't want to have the scope of this meeting, this group, get too large. So it's a lot of words to say. Yes, I agree.
Yeah, I think those are some really good points. And I certainly don't want Gateway API to be a limiting factor of what this group can do. I think mesh in Kubernetes is awesome and want to see more standardization. Gateway API and is kind of the starting point. I'm glad that's working, but I know mesh can be broader. So yeah, open to ideas. It sounds like there's broad agreement for going back to bi-weekly meetings then. So that seems good. And then the only other question I had is, should we continue to rotate between earlier and later times? Anyone have a preference of, either just earlier or going back and forth still? I think I hate to have this conversation without Nick, because I know Nick would love to make it to at least some Gamma meetings. So that seems to suggest keeping a rotation would be useful.
I certainly appreciate having this later time slot, at least in rotation.
Cool. Yes, I also, Pacific time earlier is I can manage, but I don't love it. So yes, it's good to hear someone else appreciates the later time. Okay, great. So maybe what that means is we'll transition to bi-weekly meetings, rotating, and I don't know, I think any of the Gamma leads have enough access to update Signet calendars and such, but if not, at least Shane and myself do. So yeah, just let us know. And I think we already mentioned this, but next week the meeting is on July 4th, which for many of us in the US, no one's going to be around, so just canceled. And so we're already accidentally starting our bi-weekly transition. So yeah, cool. All right, that's all I have on that one.
This is David, by the way. I just wanted to comment on Keith's comment on, other projects to integrate with. And Argo CD and Flagger, I think, to support SMI in the past, or maybe they still do. And I know you worked on the SMI initiative, Keith. I don't know if that's the same thing that we would pursue with Gamma. I know they have a little bit more, or the SMI CRDs are a little bit more nuanced than the Gamma CDs. So that was what I meant by the types of integrations. But happy to speak with you more on that offline.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So SMI resources and support it. I know that Flagger, it's Flagger and Argo rollouts both support SMI. I know Flagger specifically does have Gateway API support for Ingress, at least. I do think that that definitely does warrant a conversation to see if there's any not necessarily resources, but guidance needed to get sort of the same integration for Gateway API for Mesh or Gamma. In what ways? We do have conformance tests. I'd like to have more conformance tests as we prevent more of the spec. I think that'll be helpful. My understanding is that SMI will be, as a CNCF project, will be archived in the somewhat near future. And so I think that reaching out to them would be a good idea. Let's chat offline about that some more, David, and see what's necessary there.
Yeah, I think of the two, from what I know, Argo is probably more higher priority than Flagger. From what I can tell, more people are adopting Argo for the CI/CD stuff.
Is this question about using Argo rollouts with like HTTP route?
Yes, that's right.
Yep. There's a traffic routing plugin for Argo rollout that works with HTTP route. I've been working with that this week.
Oh, okay, cool. That's good to know.
Yeah, they had a really good demo at KubeCon a little bit ago, maybe 2 ago. I'm not sure, but yes, they've been great. Or maybe I'm mixing up what the demo was, but anyway, I know Argo and Flag are both support Gateway, but I think their focus has been on the ingress side of things. I think the difference is fairly minimal because it's both HTTP route is the focus, and it's really just, can they support a service as a parent instead of a gateway? So there's probably still some work that needs to be done, but hopefully minimal. And, I think this 080 release is really the thing to encourage integrations like that to go ahead and build something on top of it.
Yeah.
Agreed. Okay. All right. The next item on our agenda is mine. I want to give an update on operation policy. A couple meetings ago, I took the action item to start doing some research and write a what and why gap around why we might want operation policy for Gamma. I've got the outline at least kind of figured out. I want to share the current form of the document, still a ways to go to fill in some of this stuff, but want to make sure that the scope is what folks were thinking and make sure I wasn't missing anything before I go off and fill all this in. Basically, just talking about introduction about what we're trying to achieve. Ideally there's a robust enough subset of common functionality between different data plane implementations, and that's really kind of the focus of this initial exploration. My initial scope is around the semantics of allow, deny, absence of rules, empty list of rules, all those sorts of nuances, in addition to what attributes are available for matching traffic in the policy, split by typically L4, L7 type of attributes. Got a couple of different data planes for prior art. I put Kubernetes, I should say Kubernetes / CNI as one, because there is network policy as well as the admin network policy cap that's being developed. Got one going for Envoy that should capture Envoy-based implementations. Nginx, Linkerd, really love Linkerd's docs here because I was able to just copy all of this stuff. It's pretty straightforward. So thanks, Linkerd, for making my job easy. And then Cilium, the Cilium network policy resource. Does anybody feel like there's something missing here, or that their Envoy implementation for Mesh is sufficiently different enough from the Envoy RBAC filters that it needs some extra attention paid to it?
I think looking at just the Envoy ones may be a bit misleading because the Envoy API is not for humans. So it's good to look at it in terms of what's possible for implementations to implement, but not for prior art of good APIs, I think. Yeah.
That's fair. I guess it depends. Yeah, that is a good point. The difference being, like you said, the difference between prior art for the API versus what's possible in each data plane. And I guess this section conflates the two. I'm trying to think what's more important. I'm tempted to say data plane capability first, and then maybe I add an actual prior art section for APIs, and maybe edit, dig deeper into Linkerd here and just pull out these two things, so semantics and attributes, and then dive deeper into API differences, and then that'll be very much Istio versus console versus. I should get Kong and Kuma in here as well. That's one that I forgot.
Yeah, that was actually what I was going to suggest. I think it's good to highlight kind of the high level Envoy API, but maybe almost as subheadings, or maybe it's just different sections. But I know there are several Envoy based meshes that are part of this. So like Istio, Kuma, I think Console would also be all under Envoy. So you could potentially include them all there too, but I think they all have fairly different APIs.
Is Kuma Envoy, or is it based on the Kong proxy? Or maybe Kong's based on an Envoy and I'm just mistaken.
It's Envoy.
Oh, okay. Today I learned. And I didn't know I put Envoy there on console, and then Kuma. All right, awesome. All right, thanks. That's the reason why I asked. Okay, yeah, you're right, John. I should add the Ztonal API as well. It's somewhat the same, but I'll add a subheading for Ztonal.
Yeah, my other comment. Oh, sorry. You can go ahead if you want.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say my other comment. I know right now this is focused on Gamma. It may make sense for similar things to also apply to Ingress. Something we should keep in mind or talk about or something.
Yeah, I think we're quickly going to end up moving in a different direction where for so many things, Gateway API and Ingress were first because it started first. But I imagine, especially when it comes to authorization policy, it will originate from Gamma, but I imagine Ingress, some Ingress implementations may care about this too. So maybe a new reality where things start here and go the other direction for a change.
So I guess for me, the question is, what's the overlap between authorization policy and reference grant? And how you have to figure this out now. You know, we'll just defer that. I just had one thing I did. Can't remember this earlier. I completely forgot it until now. But as far as non-goals go, I think it still makes sense to keep MTLS out of scope here. We've kind of explicitly from the beginning tried to keep MTLS implementation details out of the spec. I think that still makes sense here, and we can just, when designing the API, just lean on identities without necessarily defining how those identities are populated or communicated. That feels best to me, but just wanted to toss that out here if anybody, in case anybody feels differently. Okay, John, yeah, go ahead, talk about why it's useful for Ingress.
Yeah, I think there's kind of a few. I'll just kind of brain dump because I don't have a lot of structure on this. For like, I think in theory you can do a lot of things with HTTP route, or certainly an extended HTTP route. You know, you could have a match that says like the things that should be unauthenticated, and then we could add some static response or something, and you put a 403 there. But it kind of can get a bit unmanageable, probably. Like you might imagine, for example, a filter that does OAuth authentication, and then I don't think you match before filters, not after. So then how do you do like a match that they're authenticated? What does that even mean? Is that like a custom matcher? Does the filter decide whether it rejects, or is the filter authenticating? Then you have an authorization decision later. So it's a bit wonky. I think there's also some desire to, like, matching is just matching. A lot of times the policies have allows versus denies, which can kind of decouple the policies from the routes. That also is useful for attaching outside of a route. Like you may want to say, this is really, it's synthetic, but like I want to deny all post requests across my gateway, right? You can't really represent that in a route. There's probably much better examples of that. Maybe deny all unauthenticated traffic or something would maybe be a more realistic one. So that's how I see it. It's less critical for mesh because today we don't have kind of an inbound route system at all in Gamma. So there's actually like alternatives, but I think it's still fairly important to have something along these lines in Ingress.
Yeah, my gut feeling is that when writing the API, we are going to have to be very clear about when the authorizations after authentication happens in the traffic lifecycle. I also wouldn't be surprised if we see, maybe not hosted within Gateway API itself, but if we don't see other implementations or specific implementations have things like OAuth policy filter or JWT policy or whatever, like a suite of different policies for specific things that might take place before or after. As John said, there's a lot of potential complexity. My goal for this is for like that very basic level routing of policy. This identity can talk to this identity versus not this identity. I think if we can get that done, we'll have solved like maybe 70 to 80% of the use cases. Maybe that's idealistic. And then we can have interested parties iterate on some of the other more finely grained policies for fancy things like OAuth or what have you. That's my hunch anyway. Yeah, if there are no other thoughts, like I said, my goal is to try to have this by the next meeting, which is in 2 weeks. So that gives me a good bit of time to continue the survey. You've got anything specific for your implementation that you want to make sure is added, or some nuance that you want to, want me to watch out for? Just let me know. I'll paste the link to this in the meeting notes. I realized I never did that. Survey doc. Okay. All right. If there's nothing else on that topic, we can move on to triage. We've got TLS from gateway to backend.
Yeah, neither of these are that tied to mesh, but they're leftovers from the last meeting, which was a hybrid meeting anyways. This is just more of a call out that these things really need review. These are, I think, probably our most critical open PRs that are kind of more long-term, making longer term effects, API changes. So just could use some fresh reviews on that one. And then especially the last one, which is the timeouts. This one still has a chance, a thin chance, but a chance that it can make it into 080. I think one thing that maybe hasn't been expressed clearly enough is that HTTP route timeouts and what's included here is probably not the last set of timeouts that make it into the API, but they are a set that are fairly broadly implementable. So if we can get some additional reviews on this one, I've got a review in progress. But yeah, this is a gap, and there's a chance that if everything comes together, it could make it to 080. Yeah, that's all I had on those ones.
Yeah, the timeouts had slipped my mind, so I appreciate the heads up here. Cool. Yeah, I'll go back and add this to my list and read through it.
Yeah, I should add, this is a bit of for people who may not have, it's hard to keep track of everything, but this is an unfortunate thing where both timeouts that are being added are extended only. We could not find any that could be labeled as core. And largely what these are going to be is implementable by at least Envoy and HA proxy based implementations, maybe others, but it sounded like at least Nginx would have some difficulty here. And I believe Linkerd would also have issues with this. So this is not covering everyone, unfortunately.
Linkerd is planning to implement these. In fact, the sooner that we can get this merged, actually, the better for us. So I'm really excited to see this merge, soon if possible.
Oh, okay. Well, that's great. I got that wrong, but that's awesome to hear. So yeah, I've got a review I'm hoping to finish up this afternoon, but more reviews helps this move a little faster. So yeah, awesome.
That's fantastic news. Yeah. Thanks for bringing this up. I think that triage in the Gamma meeting has been historically light, just because we haven't had a ton of Gamma specific PRs in flight. But I really love that this was a holdover from the hybrid meeting, because it helps, you know, these two, like TLS and timeouts, are very relevant to a lot of mesh implementations, some of which have gateways and some don't. So really appreciate the call out here. I'll get both of these some review in the next couple of days.
Awesome. Thanks.
All right, and with that, that is the end of our agenda. Do we have any last topics or conversations anybody wants to have? Or else I'll give you 20 minutes back.
I just wanted to ask on that timeout PR we were just looking at, if the stars do align and we get those reviews coming in quickly, when's the soonest we could expect that to potentially merge?
Yeah. So our goal was to have code completion by the end of this week. We'll see if that happens. This one is largely code complete. The thing I was asking for, I have a few nitpicks on that I'm about to add on the actual PR. But I'm hoping it will merge in the next couple of weeks, and our goal for release is end of July. So what happens in between is we need to go through API review process with Signet API reviewers, and that takes usually 2 to 3 weeks. It's just slow back and forth kind of process. Usually we have a release candidate out fairly early in that process. And then hopefully we'll have a final one out. Yeah, end of July is the hopeful time, but we'll see. I've been wrong many times before. So yeah.
Great.
But yeah, reviews really help move this along, and I think this one has actually got a good chance. So we'll see.
Looks like the ask from your comment here, Rob. Looks like the ask here is conformance tests for the API changes. So if anybody really wants to see this really not get in for 08, I think that might be a good place to potentially invest some help.
Yeah, and I'll say these are really difficult conformance tests to write, because you're kind of getting out ahead of any implementation that exists to support it. So it's kind of a best effort and will almost certainly be adjusted as time goes on. But it's helpful to have that kind of initial framework in place that can be built on later.
Yeah, I for one last thing I'll say on this is that it's really cool for to see this come through, because I remember this is one of those things that historically Gateway API had kind of tried before and had to come back around to it. And we found some way forward, even if it's just extended. Extended conformance, it's still something that's in there. It's a first class kind of API on HTTP route, and so it's really cool to see the community at work here. People, the first time contributor to Gateway API do this, so that's just really cool to see the community kind of stack hands on this.
Yeah, this has been really neat to see. This particular author was mirroring the GEP as the GEP was being written. The implementation was being written, and it just kept on staying in sync the whole time. And so that's how we have a quick turnaround, which is awesome.
Love to see it. All right. Well, it seems that there's nothing else, so I'll go ahead and close this out. Thanks as always for coming and participating, everyone. And our next meeting will be, oh goodness, what's the date on that? In 2 weeks. So not next week, but the next week. Take care, everyone.
See ya.